Yeah, here we go again. Another anti-line. 4 white. Bishop a4, knight f6, castles, bishop e7, rook e1, b5, bishop b3. Okay, anti-martial would be castles and then a4.
Yeah, so this was an option I wanted to recommend. It's a very interesting option. So in the anti-martial, we were playing a4. And that's why I wanted to recommend a system which would be consistent with a4. And so yeah, here black has a fundamental choice. Do I go for the marshal, or at least invite the marshal with c3, d5?
Yeah.
Or, sorry. Of course we play a4 instead. Or does black allow the classical Ruy Lopez d6, c3, castle, h3? And now he has his choice of different systems, like the Zaitsev, the Breyer, Chigorin, even some lines like, I think it's called the Smyslov variation at h6, or different way of reaching the Zaitsev with rook e8. But after d6, I thought it would be interesting to have a look at the system with a4, because it's very often transposes to the anti-martial with a4.
Yeah.
And it has a lot of similar ideas.
And it avoids a huge body of theory then, huh?
Yeah, it also has the advantage of taking the game into territory which is more likely to be unfamiliar to black compared to lines here. Like, for example, if a player has a pet line of the Zaitsev, he knows the line well, he's played a lot of games, he probably reaches it in most of his games in the Spanish, and he'll more likely than not be more experienced in this opening than the player playing the white pieces. But if we play a4 here, this is a rare line. Of course, not an incredibly rare line. It has been played many times by strong players, but still a line which the black player will be less likely to have seen or studied in depth. And yeah, I think it's always an interesting concept to try to get one step ahead of your opponent in preparation by deviating early on. So here black has a choice, and similar to the anti-martial choice, it will lead to, in all cases, a different type of position. The good thing for us is that a lot of the lines transpose. If, for example, bishop b7, we play d3, and black has no better choice than castling here, or, for example, knight a5, bishop a2, c5, we play knight e2. He's going to castle here. I mean, he has no better move. At one move or another, he's going to have to castle. So this position has no independent value from our point of view. If he plays b4, we play d4. So now, if he castles, it's a direct transposition to the anti-martial lines that we've seen. If black plays e takes d4, knight d4, this is actually just very good for white. Queen d4, and now we're even attacking b4. And if he plays c5, we can go back and we can exploit the weak c4 square with an advantage. So if black wants to, after b4, d4, avoid the anti-martial, there's only one way to do it, and that move is bishop g4. And this move is not so bad, but it's a bit dubious compared to transposing to the anti-martial for black. We still take on e5. And now if black plays knight takes c5, we play knight d2. And the bishop on g4 is misplaced, and we gain a tempo on it. For example, castle, h3. If knight f3, knight f3, he has to make a choice. If he goes back, he'll get hit with g4, he'll have to go back again, then we'll play e5, and we'll hit the, for example, let me show this variation. g4, bishop g6, e5, take knight e5. And you see that, black's bishop is getting hit.
g6, yeah.
The weakening of the king's side is not that important here, and very often it will go to an endgame where g4 is not a weakness at all. If he tries to keep the pin with bishop h5, g4, first of all, this stuff doesn't work. Just one tactic, knight takes g4, knight e5. Don't automatically recapture here because we'll recapture next move or the bishop. And if he goes to g6, knight e5, d5, it, again, might look like f4 is weakened, but far more important is that the bishop on g6 is out of the game. And here we play queen f3, and we follow it up with knight f1, knight g3. Again, f4. First of all, our bishop defends it, and second of all, none of his pieces are really reaching the square anytime soon. But we're left with a bishop on b3, which is unopposed, and compared to his bishop on g6, which is out of the game. And after knight f1, knight g3, we can even consider harassing this bishop further with h4, h5. So here white is better. If instead black plays d takes e5 after d takes e5, here after knight d2, black has really only one good move, which is to castle, and then we get a position we saw from the anti-martial where black is committed to bishop g4. If black tries to get clever with knight d4, unfortunately here tactics don't work for him. Take on f7, king takes, knight e5. And I just want to point out one minor nice detail. After like king g8, knight takes g4, knight g4. You know, these complications might be good for us. But instead of that, c3 is even easier. Attacking this knight. We'd rather take this knight rather than give up the c2 pawn. If the knight moves, we just collect g4. Likewise, if this knight moves, we collect d4. For example, here, we remain a pawn up. Queen b3, knight f3. We have many good moves. After c3, he can try to argue that after knight f2, king f2, our king is a bit out in the open, but I don't think that you're ever making use of that with the king on g8. And you are down a pawn. If your knight moves, I will have queen b3 check. Bishop h4 is easily covered with g3 and the king coming to g2. So basically, after b4, d4, if black tries to get cheeky with his move order, it's not going to work out for him. He's going to get a bad position. That means that after a4, we saw bishop b7 and b4 both will likely lead to a transposition to lines we've already covered. So if black wants an independent move, a way to get a position which isn't part of the anti-martial, he has only one really good way to do it, which is by playing bishop g4 immediately. Dual purpose move. Deals with the threat of a takes b5, because now a8 is defended, and it introduces a threat of knight d4. And if we were to try to solve this pin, he would take knight d4, and he hits both our queen and bishop, which is rather awkward for us. That's why after bishop g4, we play the idea of the system, which is c3. And our idea is to prove that the bishop on g4 is more of a downside for black than an advantage.
Isn't there a rule that in the Ruy Lopez, black's bishop on g4 is always misplaced unless white has played d4? I mean, he still can play d3, knight d2, something like that.
This is a general guideline, I'd say. Yeah. The bishop usually on g4 either ends up getting exchanged, after which white has the bishop pair, or it goes back to h5, after which it gets kicked with g4 and placed on a passive square on g6. And we'll see things like that in general. For example, after castle, natural move, h3, bishop h5, d3, and then, for example, if he makes a move like queen d7, knight d2, knight a5, bishop c2, c5, knight f1, and next knight g3. The bishop either will have to give itself up for the knight on f3, and there white is better with the bishop pair and a knight coming to f5, or, he has to put a bishop on g6. It's passive, and again, we can hunt the bishop, or just place the knight on f5. So that's the basic premise for white. We provoked his bishop to g4, and now we want to prove that he will lose time with it going to h5, or he'll have to give it up. This has been the battlefield, let's say, of a lot of high-level games. And sometimes white players, like especially Dominguez, has played this line often. A lot of white players try to navigate here for the same reason we are, which is to get your opponent out of the main theory and into a position where he has to be accurate if he wants to avoid getting a worse position. A few things. If b4, a5. This is a typical idea. Yeah. And I think that this idea in general should just be kind of a part of every white player's positional arsenal, which is that the knight, if it doesn't go to a5, and if we can stop it, and if we can fix this pawn on a6, we should do it. And here, for example, he castles, play h3. This already starts to look like a seriously bad position for black. I will follow up with bishop c4. And the combination of you having given up your bishop, light squared bishop, and the pawn being fixed on a6 means that white has a serious advantage. If you go back, I'll just play g4 and d3. Again, nothing to worry about with the weakening of the king side. Black has no way to exploit it, and we'll follow up with knight d2, knight f1, knight g3. And after the knight comes to g3, the king side will no longer look weak.
Yeah.
It'll actually look like white is the aggressor on the king side. The pawn placed on g4 will allow for, I wouldn't call them attacking options, but things like knight h4, knight f5 with initiative.
Crazy idea. Can I play a marshal now? Can I play d5 now? Just I want to prove that you've lost time on the king side. You've weakened your king side. I just want to sack a pawn.
Yeah. So
well, I don't know g5 whether this is immediately possible, stuff like
yeah.
that.
So
just,
concretely here, g5 is good. I just want to first mention that as a positional concept, white should not be afraid of this. For example, if I don't have g5 and I play knight d2 here, white is doing quite well. And yeah, you achieved your martial setup, I guess, your martial break, but you did it with the bishop on g6. The bishop would really love to be on e6 or on b7 or somewhere where it controls the center.
Somewhere else.
Somewhere else.
Yeah.
On g6, okay, so you attacked my pawn, but notice what else moving this pawn did. Something black always has to be aware of is that now e5 is weak. And if I play bishop a4 at some point, you might have some uncomfortable questions to answer. If you take on e4, I'll take, and then, you know, I'll follow up with moves like queen e2, maybe bishop c2 to secure this pawn, and then bring my knight to g3. And so I have a game which is from a sideline of the Andy Marshall, a line which I'm not recommending. But anyway, I played it once against Aronian in a crucial game in the candidates and last candidates. And we got a position similar to this. I think he had a better version. And the general feeling of strong players, and I had this feeling, Peter Spiedler also mentioned he had this feeling during the game, was that black was like borderline losing. It feels like black hasn't done anything too atrocious, right? But the combination of bishop on g6, and this is what Aronian had, and which is locked out of the game, and this structure, which allows for this pawn especially as a long-term weakness, and this knight on c6, which would really love to be on d7, for example. That actually constitutes a serious advantage for white, and in some cases a decisive advantage. But concretely here, I can play g5. And if d4, g f6, I pick up the piece. And if your knight moves, I can take with the bishop or the pawn. I end up cleaning up everything. Bishop is probably even better. Yeah, g5 is not. Sometimes you have to be careful about g5 because even if it wins a pawn, it could be a serious weakness. But here, the fact that I've collected your entire center with tempo is more of a serious factor. So, b4 is actually a serious mistake here. I would even call it like close to a decisive mistake.
Okay.
Instead of that, black should play either knight a5 or castle. Knight a5, we should retreat our bishop. I recommend we do it to c2. Sometimes a2 is an option. The downside of a2 is that with the bishop on a2, in some cases, black threatens to take on a4 and then get this b3 square. ba4 we've discussed in other positions. Sometimes it's very dangerous for black. But if you can't recapture this pawn quickly, it can also be quite good for black. The other problem is that if black plays c5 and locks our bishop out with c4, I really don't want our bishop to be on a2. I'd rather it to be on c2. So bishop c2. And here black again has a choice. So notice this Kasparov idea is b4. If castles, will have this idea. And black just ended up losing time with his knight. That's why black has two options. One is to play b4 immediately. And it's very important for him to do it in this move order. Like here we don't have a5. and that's why he plays knight a5 first. So it's a whole other story. The fact that we can take the pawn is not really relevant, because he'll play knight c6, and our pawn is actually hanging. Added to that, black might even elect not to take the pawn, but to play knight d4 and get a grip on the d4 square on the f3 knight. Is suddenly looking a bit pinned. So after b4, white can play d4. This is important in this move order, that before black has played c5, and if he doesn't play it, then we have this option of d4. And now e4, c4, he can't recapture again, so we actually gain the whole center. And we're also threatening d5, which asks him another question. Either you give up your pawn, d to e5, queen d8, and knight e5, or you give up the bishop pair, bishop f3, queen f3, d5. In both cases, you'll end up with a worse position. If black tries to fortify the pawn with knight e7, and we just play h3, again, bishop h5, we can consider g4 here or on the next move. And at some moment, we might even consider playing c takes b4. But even if we don't play cb4, even if we play a move like knight d2, I think we're doing well.
And if he takes, a bit before, here, yeah, precisely. Oh, it's written there. Yeah, and then
queen f3.
And then there's this move bishop g5 in some positions. I don't know, to cut the bishop pair.
So black does have this typical idea, usually in like a closed structure. Yeah. For example, if white's pawn was on d5, black's pawn was on b7, and black's knight was somewhere not miserable, but on a5, then bishop g5 would be a good positional concept to exchange bishops. But I think sometimes people also overestimate this. Like, just because you've eliminated my bishop pair doesn't mean that you've solved your problems. Specifically here, I think there's a tactical problem for black, which is I make a move like queen g3 or queen g4, and if you take, I have queen g7. So now both this and this are hanging, and I think you have serious problems.
Well,
if you play queen f6, I just take and rook c1 with the pawn up for nothing. Maybe there's this move bishop b2, queen h8, king e7. But to be honest, in this position, after take, rook a2, I don't think you end up with enough compensation. Also, I have a feeling that there's something even better. But cb4 doesn't seem to quite cut it. Anyway, if this queen g3 is not working out for some tactical reason, we have plenty of ways, I think, to prove an advantage here. For example, I would be tempted to play d5, trying to cut off this knight. And now, of course, we threaten cb4, since the knight can no longer go to c6. Take. And
that's interesting. You allow black to play b3 and knight c5, and still,
No, I understand the concept for black, but your knights are not going anywhere, are they? After knight d2, I have to say it is a double-edged position. I can't say for certain that white is better here. Black has this grip on the queen side, but on the other hand, his knights are kind of immobile, and he's always going to be timed out to b3. So let's think. Sometimes the idea is also knight d2, avoiding the immediate trade. But after castle, we're probably going to play a move like knight f1 and trade anyway. And I'm actually wondering, after bishop g5, maybe white can just take here. I should go back to c6. Now I can take here. Let's say you take with the d knight, and then I just play queen c3, and suddenly everything seems to come together for white. Now this is defended.
Yeah.
And by the way, I have a threat of f4 either here or after taking. So I'm threatening f4, and I'll have a pawn.
It's also a pawn.
Black is a little bit shaky on the queen side, and if you take on c3. Rather than automatically recapture with bc3, it's always useful to have a look around, and in this case with the queen, it looks very strong. Attacking the knight, and the knight is actually really... Like if c5, I take, Suddenly knight takes runs into b4. And d takes looks like a really unfortunate position for black, for example.
Yeah, okay.
If I play knight d2. Yeah.
Still be a bit scared. Knight c6 coming to d4, b4.
No.
Yeah?
Black has his squares, that's true. But actually, I would think a5, knight d4, bishop d3, or something like this. At the pawn on a6 is actually a serious weakness.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, black has squares, especially for his knight on d4, but we have a bishop and a weak pawn on a6. One can also consider moves like d5 in general. I mean, the idea of this is just that the knight on a5 is seriously misplaced. I mean, we cut out the knight c6 idea, and suddenly it's not clear where the future of this knight is. So that's why, yeah, black can play like this, but he does allow d4. After knight a5, bishop c2, black can also play c5. Here, I think it's important to take on b5. Like, in general, we should always evaluate when to take. But when black is ready to play b4, I think that's the time when we should take. After ab5, h3, black should probably give up the bishop, because bishop h5 you'll run into the same stuff. d3, knight d2, g4, and then the knight comes to g3, and your bishop will be out of the game. And if black takes, queen takes, castle d3, we actually get this position from another move order.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why after bishop g4, c3, black castles. We play h3, and the position I just mentioned we'll get from the move order: bishop f3, queen f3, knight a5, bishop c2, c5. Now take and d3. Same story. If black plays bishop h5, similar to the knight a5, bishop c2 line, we play d3. He'll play knight a5, and here we play bishop c2 or bishop a2. This move order gives us some extra options. Bishop a2 is interesting in this case with the bishop committed to h5. For example, if c5, knight d2, queen d7. If black plays like knight c6, it's the same story where I can play knight f1 and then g4 or knight g3 and kick the bishop back to g6. If queen d7, knight f1, take on a4, it doesn't seem like he has better moves. He has to deal with the threat of g4. And here it's important to be tactically aware again. g4. And if knight g4, h4, queen g4, knight g3, it looked like black won the piece back.
Okay.
But in fact, after knight g3, queen f3, knight h5,
yeah.
we just win the piece. We just win the bishop. That means he's forced to go to g6, and then knight e3. Okay, knight g3 is also a move. But the e3 square is also quite reasonable. In this case, knight e3 makes most sense because he took on a4, and now we saw this idea in other lines. He tries to use a b3 square, but we control all our squares. Knight d2, and this was actually a game. And white quickly started to take over with knight d5, with knight c4, and
in the end, you always collect a4 and have a better pawn structure.
A4, yeah. And by the way, if I play knight d5 and you take and I take, I'm collecting a4 immediately. The game continued queen b5, knight d5, and it was already clear that white is much better. For example, take, rook a7, the rook is attacked, queen takes a4, and knight b7 to knight c4, and a dominant, actually just winning position for white. Bishop on g6, weak a pawn squares. So bishop a2 is an interesting move. Again, b4 is a threat, so if black doesn't want to play c5 and doesn't want to go for something like this, where he lost time, he can try b4 again. And here knight d2. This in general I don't recommend, because it's a bit greedy, and we usually end up losing the b-pawn. Knight d2, rook b8. The idea of rook b8 is, if c5, we were happy to just play knight f1. But with rook b8, he has an idea of knight f1, b3. Bishop e1 is c5.
And then you can block in the bishop
with
c4 then.
We got everything we wanted on the king side. But after d4, maybe he'll just take first and play c4, and we have a problem. Yeah? If our bishop was on, I don't know, g3 and bishop g2, we would be doing great. But the bishop on b1 has nowhere to go. The e-pawn, this kind of blockade here, is very likely to persist for a long time, and black will now maintain this pawn as much as he can. And if he does, then not only is our bishop dead, our rook is also dead on a1. It has no way of escaping without moving the bishop first. That's why after knight d2 rook b8, I suggest we keep the knight on d2 and play d4 while we have the chance. And again, we saw, if black doesn't play c5, this move gains in strength. We're threatening to play g4 and take the pawn. And if he plays knight d7, suddenly we have the strong move knight c4. And our bishop comes out with tempo. We attack his pawn, he moves it, and now we're ready for g4, bishop g6, and his bishop is again cut off. And g4 is not even necessary. We have other moves like bishop e5 is a very attractive move, bishop e3. But in general, we are happy to lock this bishop out of the game. After d4, black has a tactical option, which is probably his best bet, but it doesn't really work out so well. The move is b3, knight takes b3, knight b3, bishop b3. Now we're up a pawn, but he ruins our kingside pawn structure, because we can't take on f3, b3 is hanging. And after gf3, knight h5, black is trying to get a lot of compensation by playing next bishop g5, trading bishops, and planting a knight on f4 where it starts to attack us. But luckily here we have a typical idea, f4.
Exclamation mark?
This kind of idea is known also from the Archangelist. There's a line where white captures b5, but black doubles white's f-pawns by bishop g4 takes f3. After gf3, tries to start to infiltrate on f4. But white plays f4, sacking the pawn back. The knight is hanging, so knight f4. Bishop f4, ef4. And now the f4 square is no longer can be used by black. So our king becomes safe. And we try to free up the bishop, because b2 is hanging. Our plan is to play bishop c4. And then to start attacking him on the king side. Queen g4, king h2, rook g1. Because of our powerful center, and we have two central pawns, he only has one, because his e-pawn was had to capture on f4. We actually have a lot more space.
And the far better bishop, yeah.
Well, the reason that we have a better bishop is because we have so much more space. So his bishop is hemmed in. And yeah, the strength of the bishops is what really gives white attacking chances here. Our king will be very safe on h2, and his king on g8, it looks safe, but there are long-term problems, because our bishop is bearing down on his king side, and his bishop is not really hitting anything at all. So yeah, after knight a5, bishop a2 is an interesting move. It leads to this sort of position, which is, again, I think it's a matter of taste, because bishop c2 is also an attractive option. And there was a game that I'll show where this worked out quite well for white. Black played c5. The advantage to bishop on c2 is that we saw the bishop on a2 was sometimes getting locked out.
Yeah.
Here the bishop on c2 is very unlikely to get locked out, because we can always play d4, and the bishop after like b3 can come to d3. So c5 was played. Knight d2. Again, if b4, we are happy to play g4, bishop g6. We can consider taking on b4. Like we saw, this b pawn is sometimes weak. Bishop d2. You know. But knight f1 immediately should also be quite good. But in fact, I think I would recommend this even over that, because b4 after bishop d2, the knight might have to go back, and then we can combine threats to the knight, like rook c1, bishop b3, with threats to the pawn. And as usual, the bishop on g6 is misplaced. So in the game after bishop c2, c5, knight d2, black tried an extreme way of trying to break up the center a bit, and also control the b3 square, right? So c4, his dream is after dc4, bc4, to get the open b file and attack b2 and have a central presence. Now white took on b5, but in fact, rather than what he did, I think knight f1 is very simple, and I wonder what black wanted here. Because we're going to play knight g3 next. And again, if he takes on f3, we'll take back with the queen, and then we'll have knight f5. And if he takes on d3, queen d3, we have a typical Sicilian type of structure. We could see from the Najdorf.
Yeah.
Or we could see from kind of a Sveshnikov structure, you could say. But not a very good one for black. Again, black would be fine if the bishop were on e6. But the bishop is on h5, and after knight g3, he'll either have to give it up or put it on g6, where we can continue harassing it with knight h4, or just leave it there to do nothing. The other problem for black is that b5 is hanging, and he has to find a way to deal with that. If he defends with queen d7, I play knight g3, bishop g6, and knight h4. And next move, I'll play knight hf5. I have pressure on the queen side and pressure on the king side, and this kind of cements white's advantage.
Is d5 an idea for black?
Well, d5 runs into knight g6.
I don't know precisely when. Maybe after queen d3. Always I'm trying to blast up on the center. I don't know.
No, it makes sense. Okay, so the question is, should I take on e5 or on b5? I think on e5. Take on e4, queen d8. Probably rook f d8 because you need this rook to defend your knight. a b5, a b5.
Pick up a pawn, knight g3,
and
then
g3.
It's clear. Yeah.
I'll pick up both the bishop pair and the pawn. Probably already a decisive advantage. So yeah. So his c4 idea didn't really work out, but I mean, black was quite a strong grandmaster. It shows that it's very easy to get in trouble with black.